He denied him 3 times on the darkest night of the Christian faith. While Jesus was arrested, beaten, and hastily judged, Peter, the one who swore to follow him unto death, fled from a servant's gaze, trembled before a maid, and ultimately denied knowing the very master. The rooster crowed, and then Jesus looked at him. But what happened after that? Everyone knows Peter's fall. Few speak of his restoration. Yet there is a secret moment between him and Jesus, a dialogue that remained hidden for years, kept in the memory of a man who wept, was restored, and then fell silent. What did Jesus say to Peter after the 3 questions of love? Why did he carry this secret until his final days? And how can a single sentence completely change the way you perceive forgiveness, failure, and purpose? Get ready to discover the most intimate mystery of an apostle who became the rock of the church, not by being strong, but by being sincere. Stay with us until the end and discover the hidden secret of Peter, what he heard from Jesus after denying him 3 times. Join us as we dive into the journey of Peter, the disciple who fell but was restored, and discover how his sincerity made him one of the most impactful figures of the Christian faith. The sun had not yet touched the waters of the Sea of Galilee when Simon got up. The smell of fish clung to his clothes before the day even began. He loved that sea, or at least he had learned to respect it. This was how he earned his living, day after day, together with his younger brother Andrew. They had worked together since they were boys, heirs to their father's nets, to the wooden boat, to the calluses on their fingers, and to the hope that always came with each new catch. Simon was not an educated man. He did not know how to debate with the Pharisees, nor recite the Psalms by heart, as some elders did on the Sabbath. But he was a good man, just and straightforward in speech. And when it came to fishing, few knew better the currents of the sea, the unpredictable schools of fish, and the sound of the wind cutting across the rocky shores of Galilee. He was married to a woman named Miriam. Yes, the Bible does not mention her name, but she existed, and her presence was a firm anchor amid life's turbulent sea. They had 2 sons, Eliab, the older one, brave like his father, and Micaiah, still small, who showed more fondness for stories than for nets. Although the scriptures do not record them, the silence of the Gospels allows us to imagine the smiles, the sound of little feet running through the modest home in Capernaum, the smell of fresh bread that Miriam baked every morning. It was the time of Caesar Augustus, and Roman rule hung like a heavy shadow over the shoulders of Israel's people. There were high taxes, soldiers patrolling the roads, and many men were weary. Some rebelled, others resigned themselves. Simon merely tried to get by. His greatest aim was to keep his household standing, feed his children, honor his parents, and continue in the tradition of his people. But something in the air was changing. Rumors spread along the shores. A new rabbi, a different sort of man, was preaching with authority. They said he healed lepers, that he forgave sins, something only God could do. They said he spoke with both power and gentleness. Simon listened in silence, washing his nets while others murmured. He had little time for spiritual revolutions. Fish was scarce, sleep was short, and the bills seemed to multiply like sand beneath his feet. And on one of those ordinary days, between a frustrating night on the sea and the chore of cleaning dirty nets, everything began to change. He was kneeling, washing the meshes by the shore, when he saw a crowd approaching. That by itself was not unusual. Curious people followed any new development. But there was something different about that group. Their faces were attentive, their eyes open, as though expecting more than mere words. That was when he saw him. A man of ordinary stature, but with an uncommon presence. His gaze was steady, but without arrogance. His eyes, there was something in them. Authority and compassion intertwined, as if he saw more than just faces and names. The crowd pressed around him, and upon seeing Simon, he pointed to the boat. "May I use it?" Simon hesitated. It was not the best time. The nets were still wet. He was tired. And who was this man? But there was something in his voice, a tone rarely heard. Simon nodded. They got into the boat and moved a little away from the shore. The man sat down and began to teach. Simon listened without appearing to listen. His eyes were on the sea, but his heart was beginning to stir. The man's words were different. He did not speak like the scribes. His was not a memorized speech. It was as though each sentence pierced straight into his chest. It was as though he was speaking directly to him. When he had finished teaching, the man turned to him. "Take the boat into deeper water and cast your nets." Simon sighed. The man's expression made it clear he was serious, but he was a carpenter, not a fisherman. "Master, we've worked all night and we haven't caught anything," he said, weighed down by frustration. "But at your word, I will let down the nets." The net dropped, unrolling like hope in the wind. And then a tug, strong, another, then yet another. It was impossible. The net was tightening, stretching, creaking as though about to tear. Fish, so many fish, more than he had ever seen at once. He called his companions. James and John came running, and both boats nearly sank from the weight of the haul. Simon fell to his knees. "Depart from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." It was not a theatrical gesture. It was a cry of the soul. He knew he was not merely in the presence of a teacher or a prophet. He stood before someone who saw beyond surfaces, someone who looked inside. But the man, who would later call him Peter for the first time, looked at him with both tenderness and purpose. "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Simon did not understand. How could he? It was too big, too strange. How could he leave everything behind? His home, his children, Miriam? Yet how could he go on as if nothing had happened? He looked at his hands, the same hands that had so often pulled up empty nets, now trembling in the face of such abundance. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew the sea would never be the same again. But why would someone like him be chosen for something so great? Time passed, and the life of Simon, now called Peter, never returned to the routine of the nets. He walked alongside Jesus, seeing things no eye had ever seen. It was as though the world had gained new colors. The sick rose up, the blind could see, demons fled at a single word. Crowds followed him, and Peter was there, close to the center of it all. But along with the wonder came inner conflicts. He had questions he did not know how to answer. Who was this man really? He called him Lord, yet sometimes he seemed to be more than that. At other times he seemed so human. He cried, grew tired, needed space. Peter did not understand it all. But what unsettled him most was that Jesus knew him deeply, even the parts he himself wanted to forget. One afternoon, after a long day of teaching, Jesus ordered the disciples to get into a boat and cross to the other side of the sea. He, however, went up a mountain to pray alone. The sea was calm when they set out, but as so often happened, the calm did not last. Clouds filled the sky unexpectedly. The wind began to blow. The oars grew heavy, and the water struck the hull with growing force. Night fell thickly, and the darkness felt alive, as if the sea had awakened with hunger. Peter was used to such storms. He knew what to do, how to keep the boat steady, how to calm the others. But there was something different that night. The storm seemed determined not just to swallow the boat, but the soul of everyone in it. That was when someone yelled, pointing at the sea. There was a figure out there walking on the water. "It's a ghost," they cried in panic. Peter narrowed his eyes, his heart pounding. And then the voice he knew so well cut through the wind. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." It was Jesus. Peter felt something indescribable swell within his chest, an impulse, a blend of faith and madness. "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." For a moment, the world stopped. The sea no longer roared. The wind seemed to hush, just to hear the answer. "Come," said Jesus. Without thinking, Peter swung his leg over the boat and stepped onto the water, and it held him. One step, another, then another. His heart beat like the drums he heard during festival days in Jerusalem. He was walking on the water, but all it took was a glance at the wind, a distraction, a flicker of doubt, and it all collapsed. Certainty turned to fear, the miracle turned to dread, and Peter began to sink. "Lord, save me," he shouted as the waves rose around his face. Jesus' hand reached him immediately, strong, firm, secure. "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" Those words struck his soul like lightning. Peter did not know how to respond. He still felt the strength of the hand that rescued him, but also the weight of his own weakness. Silence fell between them as they got back into the boat. The storm ceased the moment Jesus stepped aboard. The sea, now calm, reflected Peter's troubled face. He shrank back in a corner, feeling small. Once again, it was not the wind that toppled him. It was himself, his fear, his doubt, his faith that had seemed so great until it was tested. The others looked at him, uncertain what to say. He could only look at himself. He had seen the impossible, and still he doubted. He had been called and nearly drowned. As the stars returned to the sky and the boat sailed on in silence, Peter could not stop thinking about one thing. Would the Master trust someone whose faith was so fragile? The days with Jesus were unpredictable. Peter never knew if he would wake up to a miracle, a crowd, or a persecution. Sometimes it was all of the above in a single day, but one thing was constant. The Master always there, always saying and doing things no other man would dare. And the more Peter walked beside him, the more a question grew within him, one that everyone whispered, but no one answered with certainty. Who was this man truly? They had departed northward, heading toward the region of Caesarea Philippi. It was a place of rocks, caves, and ancient altars raised to pagan gods. There, where Israel's faith was nearly a whisper among the cries of idols, Jesus stopped and looked at the 12. Who do people say that I am? The disciples looked at one another. The question had lingered many times, but never so directly. Some say you are John the Baptist, one said. Others Elijah, another added. Or maybe Jeremiah or one of the prophets, James concluded. Jesus listened patiently. His eyes, however, were fixed on Peter. Then he asked the question that would change everything. But you, who do you say I am? Silence fell like a blade. Peter felt his heart race. Something within him wanted to burst out. Something he himself could not explain. His hands sweated. The air seemed heavier. Then he spoke. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. The words came out forcefully, but without pretense. It was as if they escaped before he even thought them. When he was done, there was a moment of astonishment among the others. No one had ever said that aloud before. Jesus smiled, not just any smile. It was one of recognition, of tenderness. He drew near to Peter, and in a voice sweet yet firm declared, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. Peter took a deep breath. He felt a strange warmth course through his body. It felt good, right? But Jesus was not finished. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Those words hung in the air like invisible trumpets. Peter's eyes widened. He felt as though the weight of heaven had been placed in his hands. Keys to the kingdom of heaven. I will build my church. He did not understand it all, but the impact was profound. Jesus, the Master, the one who healed with a touch and spoke like no other, had just entrusted something sacred to him, to the one who was afraid, who sank, who was just a fisherman. The other disciples murmured, amazed and confused. Peter looked at the ground, trying to comprehend. He was now a rock, a foundation. How could that be? He could not even control his own impulses. He still felt small under the Master's gaze. But Jesus had spoken. He had chosen. And the words echoed in the depths of Peter's soul, mingling with doubts and a timid hope. Later that same day, Jesus began to talk of strange things, suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection. Peter, still with his mind full of words about church and kingdom of heaven, could not bear the thought of his Master suffering. That shall never happen to you, Lord, he said, pulling him aside. But Jesus, with a steady gaze, replied with words that cut him deeply. Get behind me, Satan, you are a stumbling block to me. The same one who called him a rock now said he was a stumbling block. Peter felt confused, small again. His mouth, which had confessed the Christ, was now rebuked as though it belonged to the enemy. What had happened? How had it all changed so quickly? As the group carried on, Peter lagged a few steps behind. The wind whistled through the caves of Caesarea Philippi, howling as though it knew things he had yet to learn. But Peter still did not understand the weight of that promise. Before continuing, we ask for your collaboration. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video to bless us and help us keep sharing transformative stories from the Bible. Now, let's move on to the remarkable steps of Peter. It was night in Jerusalem. The streets were already steeped in silence, and the aroma of herbs and freshly baked bread filled the air. In an upstairs room of a borrowed house, 13 men gathered for what at first appeared to be just another Passover feast. But Jesus' heart was heavy. His eyes, darker than usual, carried a silent sorrow, like one who knows time is running out. Peter looked around. He knew these men. They had walked together, eaten together, cried and laughed together. For 3 years, James and John always close. Matthew, the ex-tax collector, now as much a brother as the others. Judas, silent, his eyes avoiding everyone's. And Jesus, so present yet so strange that night. The table was set with bitter herbs, wine, and unleavened bread, ancient symbols of deliverance. But Jesus seemed elsewhere, as though he heard voices no one else could. Peter tried to hide his uneasiness. He still did not understand why they had come to Jerusalem in such a tense time. Everything seemed on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, without warning, Jesus stood up. He removed his cloak, took a towel and wrapped it around his waist. Silence. They all stopped chewing. Peter frowned. What was he doing? Jesus filled a basin with water and knelt. He began to wash the disciples' feet one by one, calmly, silently, like a servant, like the least among them. Peter froze. No, Lord, you shall never wash my feet, he said firmly, pulling his feet back. Jesus looked at him, and although his voice was gentle, it carried the weight of eternity. If I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Peter swallowed hard. Those words cut deeper than any rebuke. Then wash my hands and my head as well. Jesus smiled tenderly, like a father with a child trying to show more devotion than he truly felt. Whoever has already bathed needs only to wash his feet and is completely clean. Peter did not understand all of it, but he understood enough. Jesus was doing something far greater than a mere act of hospitality. He was teaching, showing that the greatest among them would be the one who bowed down. And Peter, always impulsive, always the first to speak, remained there, silent as he felt the warm water flow over his dirty feet. After washing their feet, Jesus returned to the table. The atmosphere was heavy, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. One of you will betray me this night, he said. They all looked shocked. Tension hung in the air. Peter signaled to John, who was beside Jesus. Ask him who it is, he whispered, uneasy. John leaned over, but Jesus did not reveal any names. He simply said he would do so by giving the piece of bread dipped in the dish, and then he gave it to Judas. Their exchange of looks was brief, but eternal. Judas left, and the night swallowed him. Silence continued its reign until Jesus turned to the disciples and said, "You will all fall away because of me this night." Peter reacted at once. His chest swelled with courage. Even if everyone else stumbles, I will never stumble. Jesus looked at him with sweetness and sorrow in his eyes, like someone who sees what the other is not ready to face. Peter, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter's world shook inside him. How could that be? Deny the Master, the one who walked on water, the one who rescued him from doubt, the one who called him a rock. Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you, he insisted, his voice trembling with certainty. But Jesus did not reply. He just held Peter's gaze, and in that gaze was something Peter would never forget. Silence settled over the table. Bread was broken, wine was passed, but the flavor of the night had changed. Yet Jesus looks into Peter's eyes and says, "Before the rooster crows." Night in Jerusalem felt darker than any other. The aroma of wine and herbs from the supper still lingered in Peter's memory. But everything was different now. The tone of Jesus' words, the exchanged glances, the charged atmosphere, something was about to happen. And Peter felt it in his very bones. They had left the upper room and walked in silence to a place called Gethsemane, a garden hidden among ancient olive trees where the Master often prayed. But on that night, there was something different in his demeanor. Jesus did not smile. His eyes were distant. His breathing was heavy. "Sit here while I go over there to pray," he said to the disciples. But he took Peter, James, and John with him. his three closest companions, the three who had witnessed the transfiguration on the mountain, the three who knew a bit more than the others. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Peter nodded, though he did not understand the depth of that sorrow. He had never seen Jesus like this, vulnerable, fragile, almost human. Jesus moved a little further away. Peter watched him kneel, shoulders slumped, as if carrying the weight of the entire world. Then he heard his voice choked with pain. "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Peter tried to stay awake. He fought against fatigue, but his eyes felt like lead. His body betrayed his spirit. His head drooped, and sleep overtook him. When he woke, he jumped at the sight of Jesus standing before him. The Master's expression was sad and disappointed. "Could you not watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." Peter tried to make excuses. He mumbled an apology, but Jesus was already walking away again. He knelt once more, and once more Peter fell asleep. He was awakened by the same voice, now firmer. For a second time he had failed to watch, and for a third time as well. Sleep seemed to mock his resolve. But then Jesus stood, his eyes resolute. "Rise, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." Peter leaped to his feet, eyes wide. Beyond the olive trees, torches flickered in the darkness. Soldiers, armed men, and leading them Judas. The betrayal was silent. A kiss on the cheek, a feigned greeting, and then chaos. Peter did not think. Rage filled his chest. Fear exploded into action. He drew his sword and with a swift move cut off the ear of one of the high priest's servants, Malchus by name. A scream tore through the night. Blood flowed. The soldiers panicked. But then, like a wall between two worlds, Jesus stretched out his hand. "Enough! Put your sword away!" he shouted firmly. Peter froze. "All who draw the sword will die by the sword. Or do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels?" Then tenderly he touched the wounded man's face and healed him. Peter let his sword fall to the ground. Metal clanged against the stones of the garden. His heart pounded. He did not understand. He fought for Jesus and was rebuked. He was protecting him and got corrected. Everything felt out of place. The soldiers advanced. They arrested Jesus. The disciples stepped back. They fled. Peter hesitated for a moment. Then he ran too. Ran like a frightened boy. Ran as though the shadows of the garden would devour everything he thought he knew. But the weight of Jesus' gaze, that final look before he was taken away, would not leave his mind. It was as if it said, "Not by force, Peter, not by the sword." Later, alone, breathless, hidden in the night, Peter leaned against a wall and let his body slide down. He was sweaty, confused, his soul in pieces. He could still feel the sword's hilt in his hand, still hear the servant's cry, still feel Jesus' eyes on him. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to fight. He wanted to protect. But Jesus seemed to want something entirely different. The sword would not save Peter from his greatest battle, the one that would be fought within his heart. The city slept in shadows, but the temple corridors were alive with hurried footsteps, venomous whispers, and flickering torches. Jesus had been seized, arrested like a criminal, bound like a thief. Judas's betrayal had opened the gates to the darkest night in history. And Peter followed at a distance. His heart pounded erratically. Fear mingled with guilt. His feet carried him forward even as his mind screamed for him to turn back. Every corner was a risk. With each step he kept to the shadows, yet his eyes remained fixed on the Master's figure. The one he had promised to follow unto death was now dragged along, wounded and silent, and Peter could do nothing. He followed all the way to the courtyard of the high priest's house. Flames of a fire trembled at the center, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the soldiers and servants gathered there. Peter moved closer, blending in with them, trying to appear invisible. His eyes searched for Jesus, who was inside, interrogated, humiliated, struck by both words and blows. He sat down near the fire. He needed the warmth, but it was more than the cold making him shiver. It was the weight of the sword left behind in Gethsemane. It was the weight of not understanding, of not knowing who he was now. That was when the first voice spoke up. A young maid with keen eyes pointed at him in surprise. This man was also with him. Peter froze. He looked around. All eyes turned on him. The fire seemed to blaze brighter. The words tumbled out before he could think. "Woman, I do not know him." The sound of that denial reverberated within him like the snapping of a taut rope, but no one said anything. People resumed their conversations. The danger seemed past. Few minutes later, another man eyed him with suspicion. He furrowed his brow and spoke loudly. "You too are one of them." Peter raised his hand hastily, denying it. "Man, I am not." His words cut through the air. The denial came more firmly, more desperately. Peter's chest burned. Sweat trickled down his neck. He tried to drift away, to blend in further, but it was too late. Before long, a third, a relative of Malchus, the man whose ear had been cut off, approached. He recognized Peter at once. "I saw you with him in the garden," Peter exploded. Fear turned to anger. Shame turned to fury. And in a trembling voice, perhaps shouting to convince himself even more than them, he exclaimed, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." And at that exact moment, the rooster crowed. The sound sliced through the night like a sharpened blade. It was not merely a crow. It was the echo of a prophecy, the reminder of a broken promise. The moment Peter's world fell apart, he looked into the house, and there among soldiers in the midst of the trial, Jesus turned his face and looked at him. It was just a glance, no words, no accusation, but that look pierced Peter's soul. It held no anger, no scorn. It held pain and love, a love so profound, so true, that every defense Peter had raised crumbled like dust in the wind. He rose suddenly, tripping over his own feet, and ran from the courtyard. No one tried to stop him. Now the night belonged to him alone, and the memory of the rooster, of that look, would follow him forever. Peter ran through the empty streets of Jerusalem, his bare feet slapping the stone ground. He ran like a man fleeing from himself, and when he could run no more, he collapsed. He wept as he never had in all his life. His chest ached and he was overcome with sobs. He felt dirty, unworthy, lost. He had failed, not in some minor way, but in the very thing he had sworn he would never do. He had betrayed the Master, not for money, not with a kiss, but out of fear, with words, with silence. And Jesus looked at him not in anger, but with a love that shatters all defenses. Peter disappeared, while the world witnessed the most unjust trial in history. While soldiers mocked and the crowd shouted, "Crucify him!" Peter was nowhere to be found. There was no sword, no words, only silence. After that early morning, when the rooster crowed and Jesus' eyes met him at his weakest, Peter vanished. The city of Jerusalem swarmed with rumors, but he hid in alleyways by walls in the shadows. His soul weighed more than his body could bear, and it was not the fear of the Romans that kept him away. It was fear of himself. He wandered aimlessly through the narrow streets, like a man who no longer knew where his body ended and his guilt began. The air felt heavier, his steps were slower, the world darker, and every corner, every stone, every stranger's face seemed to whisper the same verdict. You denied him. On the cross, the Master bled. There on Golgotha, he carried the sin of the world. Mary wept at the foot of the cross. John remained steadfast by her side. But Peter could not find the courage to appear. The same man who had said he would die with Jesus now trembled in silence somewhere beyond the reach of daylight. He did not see the nails being driven in. He did not see the sky darken. He did not hear the cry, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Nor did he witness the moment Jesus gave up his spirit, but he heard the rooster. On that somber afternoon, amid the chaos of voices and the pounding of the hammer, Peter still heard in his mind, in his soul, the crow of the rooster once, twice, 3 times, night after night, like an unending lament, like a thunderclap repeating his cowardice. He tried to sleep in the nights that followed, but every time he closed his eyes, it was as if he awoke again in the courtyard, before the fire, before the servants, before the Master he had denied. How could he have done it? He remembered the look, the touch, the words. "You are Peter. On this rock I will build my church." But what sort of rock crumbled at the first gust of wind? What kind of stone shatters under the weight of shame? He felt weak, broken, filthy inside. The strong, impulsive, courageous fisherman, now just a shadow of himself. He walked as though chained by invisible shackles. Every face in the city seemed to accuse him, even if they did not know what he had done. He avoided the other disciples, avoided looking at the sky, avoided everything that reminded him of the Master, and everything reminded him. The hands Jesus had washed, the feet he had insisted on bathing, the sword that fell to the ground in Gethsemane, the fire in the courtyard warming a traitor, the rooster, the look, the love even wounded, even while being led to death. Jesus looked at him with love, not with disappointment or condemnation, but with a love so profound, so genuine, that it now burned like embers in Peter's heart. That was what destroyed him most. How could he fail someone who loved him so much? He thought about leaving, returning to Galilee, pretending nothing had happened, being just the fisherman he had been before. But even the sea now seemed distant. The water that once served as a refuge was now a mirror of his shame. He no longer knew where he belonged. Wherever he went, he would carry that night with him. That memory, that pain. Days passed in a haze. Some said Jesus' body had been buried. Others that the Pharisees had won. Still others spoke of a strange promise that he would rise again. But for Peter, none of it made sense, because to him everything was already over. In the dark house where he hid, silence was his only companion. And in that silence he heard his own soul cry out. There were no crowds, no teachers, no cross, only the echo of what used to be and what he was now. A soft knock on the door awakened him. It was Andrew, his brother. His face bore the same sorrow. The disciples were together in hiding, waiting for something or nothing. The hope that had once shone in Jesus' eyes now seemed absent in them all. Peter went. He sat in a corner silent. He said nothing. He did not cry. He did not react. He only looked down until John, trembling, murmured, "He died." But he also said he would rise on the third day. Peter did not reply. He simply closed his eyes. It was impossible, right? And what if it was true? If Jesus returned, how could he face the Master? What could he say? Nothing. There were no words left. Only the rooster, always the rooster, and a question bleeding in his soul, like a thorn in his heart. How can someone who has failed so greatly still be called by God? The third day dawned slowly. The faint light breaking over the horizon seemed hesitant, as though even the sky acknowledged the morning that shrouded Jerusalem. In the house where the disciples were hiding, their eyes were hollow, their words few, their hearts weighed down. Peter, seated in a corner, had not slept for days. He did not know what rest was. He simply stared at the floor as though expecting the earth to swallow him up. Hours dragged on. It was hard to mark time since that morning. He barely ate, barely spoke. He only breathed, living as if surviving himself. That was when the doors flew open. Mary Magdalene burst in, panting, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide, as if she had seen the impossible. "They've taken the Lord's body," she shouted. "The tomb is empty." The silence that fell was almost suffocating. John was the first to run out. Peter hesitated for a second, but something propelled him forward. His legs took off without his heart's permission. His breath failed with each stride, but he did not stop. He ran like a man fleeing guilt. He ran like someone chasing redemption. John, faster, arrived at the tomb first. He stopped at the entrance, afraid to go in. Peter, though breathless, pushed himself inside, and there he froze. The linens were there, folded, neatly arranged, as though someone had gotten up calmly. But the body was gone. Peter stepped closer slowly. He looked around, touched the cloths. The smell lingered, myrrh, aloes, burial spices. But Jesus was not there. His heart pounded. For a moment, hope threatened to flare within him, like an ember reigniting. But it was soon smothered by doubt. What if it was true? If he had returned? If Jesus were alive, what if he still remembered? Peter could not escape the thought. If Jesus was alive, then the moment of his denial was also alive. The pain of seeing his closest disciple lie 3 times was still alive. That look, 1 Peter would never forget, was still alive. What if the resurrection also brought judgment? They returned home in silence. John seemed excited, hopeful. Peter did not. Yes, the tomb was empty. But that only made the weight in his chest heavier, because now, more than ever, he did not know what to do, what to say, how to act. In the days that followed, news spread. Some women claimed to have seen angels. Others said they had spoken with Jesus himself. Thomas doubted. John smiled quietly. But Peter remained silent. Deep down, he was uncertain whether he wanted to see Jesus or not. What if he asks why I fled? He wondered. What if he wants to know why I denied him? How could he look into the eyes of the one who washed his feet and then watched him run away? How could he explain the inexplicable? Yet something curious began to happen. The women said an angel had given them a message that the disciples should go to Galilee and that Peter should come too. He by name. Jesus wanted to see Peter. Why? He could not comprehend it. He was unworthy. He was the silent betrayer, the absent disciple, the rock that had crumbled. Still, he called Peter. Peter paced the house aimlessly, his eyes unfocused. The others were already debating the idea of returning to Galilee. It was where it all began. A place they might try to understand what came next. But for Peter, it was more than that. It was where the sea awaited, where the boat might still be, where he might go back to being who he was before. But was there still time for that? He looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly. A gentle breeze blew by. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to remember the first time he saw Jesus by the shore, washing nets. The look, the voice, "Follow me." That memory burned now because he had followed, but he had also denied. That night, lying on a rough blanket, hearing the whisper of the wind and the breathing of the other disciples, Peter opened his eyes in the darkness. And as every night since then he heard it, without any rooster, without a courtyard, without a fire, he heard it. The crowing, the same sound, the same cut, the same weight, because the tomb was empty. But Peter's heart was still filled with pain. Galilee was just as Peter remembered it. The same sound of water lapping against the rocks, the same salty scent in the air, the same morning breeze stinging his face. Yet everything felt different. The serenity of the landscape contrasted with the turmoil within his chest. Every step in the sand felt like walking on the ashes of what had once been his faith. They had returned. Some of the disciples were with him, John, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, Andrew, but there was no longer enthusiasm. It was a silent homecoming, an attempt to return to the beginning, as if they could erase all that had happened, as if the sea could wash away the past. "I'm going fishing," Peter said curtly. It was still dark. The others followed him. The boat was there, an old friend. The nets still rough. Their hands knew exactly what to do. Their bodies remembered, but their hearts were not the same. They cast their nets for hours, and the sea, as it had the first time, remained silent. No fish, no response, only darkness and fatigue. Dawn was starting to break when a voice called from the shore. Someone was there in the distance. "Children, do you have anything to eat?" Peter squinted. The morning haze blurred his vision. It was just a silhouette. "No," someone in the boat replied. "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." There was something about that voice, something familiar, something that froze Peter inside. They cast the net, and it filled instantly again. The fish tugged hard, nearly tearing the mesh. John, wide-eyed, turned to Peter. "It is the Lord." Peter did not wait. He threw himself into the sea as he had the first time. The water was cold, but his chest burned. He swam frantically, each stroke a cry for forgiveness. When he reached the shore, he was panting, trembling, and there, over the coals, there was fish and bread. Jesus looked at him. "Bring some of the fish you have caught," he said. Peter rushed back and helped the others drag in the net. 153 large fish, and the net did not tear. They sat around the fire. No one spoke a word. The silence was reverent. Jesus took the bread and distributed it. Then the fish, just as before, as always, but Peter could barely swallow. The heat of the coals before him felt like the same heat consuming him inside. They were not just coals. It was not just breakfast. It was an altar, a reunion. After they had eaten, Jesus turned to him. "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?" Peter felt his stomach clench. He did not call him Peter. He called him Simon, his old name, as if pulling him back to the starting point. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs. Silence, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter swallowed hard, his face burned. The coals in front of him reminded him of the fire where he had denied Jesus. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Shepherd my sheep." More silence. "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter trembled now. His voice faltered. His eyes welled up. 3 times, 3 questions, 3 answers, 3 open wounds, each being touched in turn. He lowered his head. There was no hiding the pain now. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus looked at him with tenderness. "Feed my sheep?" Right then, between the sound of the sea and the smell of roasted fish, Peter wept inwardly. Jesus was not just restoring a disciple. He was entrusting him once again, laying responsibility on his frail shoulders, giving him another chance. But there was more. Those words were not merely about forgiveness. They were not merely about healing. There was a tone, an echo hidden between the lines, as if the Master was preparing him for something yet greater, something Peter could not yet grasp. Jesus did not mention the denial. He did not mention the rooster. He did not mention the flight. But he spoke of love, and that hurt more because true love confronts more than any rebuke. True love forgives and sends out. Peter looked at the sea, the same sea that was no longer a refuge, but now a witness. The Master at his side, his heart still wounded, his hands trembling, and a mission starting all over again. But what did those words really mean? There was something more between the lines. Jerusalem buzzed with activity. It was the Feast of Pentecost, one of the greatest Jewish celebrations. The streets were filled with mingling voices, all kinds of faces, merchants carrying baskets of dates, pitchers of wine, and spring-harvested wheat. But amid that noisy throng, a small group waited in silence. Jesus' disciples were waiting. Peter was among them, seated in a corner of the upper room, hands clasped, gaze far away. The same man who days earlier dove into the water to reach the Master on the beach was now diving into himself. Jesus' words before ascending still echoed. "Stay in Jerusalem until you are clothed with power from on high." They waited. That was all they knew to do at that moment. A mix of expectancy and fear stirred in Peter's heart. The Spirit was coming, Jesus had promised. But how, when, and why him? Why still trust the one who had failed? Peter's heart was torn between hope and the memory of his guilt. In the hours that dragged on in that upper room, doubt crept closer. The questions came like the wind. Am I still worthy? Did he choose me by mistake? But between those questions, something new began to sprout. A different kind of trust, no longer based on his own strength but on the promise. And then it happened. It came without warning. First a sound. It was not thunder, not the voice of men. It was like a wind, but it did not shake the windows or bend the trees. It was as though it blew inside of them. Then fire, not fire that consumes, but light that warms, that cleanses, that seeps through their pores and touches their souls. Tongues as of fire rested upon each one of them. Peter felt it. It was not mere emotion. It was presence. It was as if God himself enveloped him and said, "I am still with you." The shame disappeared. The fear vanished. The once cornered soul now rose up in power. His body trembled not with terror, but with fullness. He wanted to speak. The words formed in his heart before he could even think them. All around, the other disciples began to speak in foreign tongues, languages they had never learned. Voices mingled in the air, drawing the attention of those in the streets of Jerusalem. "What is this?" they asked. "How do we hear them in our own language?" "They're drunk," mocked others. But Peter did not remain silent. He stood up. He looked at the crowd. He who had denied Jesus before a servant girl now stood before thousands. He climbed to a higher spot, took a deep breath. "Men of Judea and all who dwell in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to my words." The crowd quieted. Their eyes turned to him. And Peter preached. He spoke with clarity, with resolve, with passion, but above all with authority. Not the authority of impulse, but of the Spirit. He spoke of the prophet Joel and how the last days would come with an outpouring of power. He spoke of David and the Scriptures. He spoke of the Messiah, the Christ, the one who had been crucified but was raised. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. There was silence, a collective gasp, then a cry, "What shall we do, brothers?" Peter closed his eyes for an instant. He smiled not with pride but with gratitude. The answer was not his. It came from heaven. "Repent and let each one of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit." And on that day, 3,000 souls were saved. The upper room became a seed. Jerusalem's streets turned into an altar. Faith blossomed. And Peter, the same one who had wept alone after his denial, was now the spokesperson of grace. He preached until sunset, until his voice was raw, until every final gaze shone with hope. But that same night, when the city slept and the disciples were still rejoicing, Peter slipped away. He climbed up onto the roof of the house and sat beneath the sky. The wind blew, the stars surrounded him, and even with the Spirit burning within him, even with thousands hearing his words, he sensed it. He sensed something unspoken, something yet to come. Yes, he had been filled with the Spirit. Yes, he had been restored. Yes, the fire now lived in him. But had the past truly been left behind, or was there still something left unsaid? It was the start of a new era. The Spirit had been poured out. The early church grew like fire in dry straw. Every house became an altar. Every gathering a time of worship, every breaking of bread, a reminder that he was alive. The words of Jesus before he ascended no longer seemed distant. They were a vivid, burning reality. And Peter was now a new voice in that scene. He was no longer hidden, no longer ashamed. Now standing firm, filled with a boldness he himself did not recognize. Yet despite this, despite the crowd growing with each sermon, something within him still murmured, a discreet echo like a timid shadow in the corner of his soul, a scar that even the power of the Spirit had not yet erased. One morning, Peter and John were going up to the temple for the 9th hour of prayer. It was an old habit. The temple was still the center of the people's faith. People came and went with eyes weary from religion. But Peter carried something different. He did not go in search of rituals. He bore within him a presence. At the gate called Beautiful, there was a man paralyzed from birth, placed there daily by compassionate hands, hoping for mercy from passers-by. A coin, a piece of bread, a gesture of compassion. That was all he knew. When he saw Peter and John approaching, he held out his hand as he always did. "Alms, please." Peter stopped. He looked at him, and something was ignited in that moment. The eyes of the paralyzed man met Peter's eyes, and for the first time, someone saw him beyond his condition. "Look at us," Peter said. The man obeyed, expecting to receive some coins. But what he received was something he never could have imagined. "I have no silver or gold." Peter's voice was firm, clear, full of conviction. "But what I have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." He stretched out his hand. For a second, time seemed to stand still. And then life, strength, movement. The man felt something surge up through his legs, his bones, his joints. Something he had never felt before, now pulsing with energy. He grasped Peter's hand and in one leap stood up. Then he walked. Then he ran. Then he was jumping and shouting and weeping. He entered the temple with them, glorifying God with all his breath. The people recognized him. It was the same man who for years had dragged himself at the entrance. Now he was standing, strong, happy, and at the feet of those two men. A crowd gathered around them, wide eyes, confused hearts, and Peter once again did not hide. He climbed the steps at the entrance, took a deep breath, and preached. "Men of Israel, why do you marvel at this? Why do you look at us as though by our own power or piety we had made this man walk?" Then he pointed to heaven. "The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our fathers, has glorified his son Jesus, the one you handed over. But God raised him from the dead, and by faith in his name, this man whom you see and know has been strengthened. the words cut like a sword, yet also healed like a balm. The people listened in silence. Some wept, others murmured, but no one could deny what they were seeing. He was there walking, leaping, alive. From that day on, Peter's name began to spread. Religious leaders started watching with suspicious eyes. Authorities became restless. But the people recognized that something new was happening. And Peter was finally beginning to fulfill what Jesus had prophesied for him. He was the rock, the one who sank, who denied, who wept, now standing firm. And when he returned home that night, exhausted from the crowds, still picturing the paralytic running in his mind, Peter sat down alone. He heard the footsteps of the other disciples, their prayers, their songs. But deep down, in the very depths, there was still a voice, a memory, a name echoing with tenderness and pain. Simon. The temple's fire was no longer the same as the courtyard fire. But within him, the embers still smoldered. He had healed a man with a word. But as for himself, could all this strength also be enough to heal his inner wounds? The sun blazed high over Joppa. The smell of the sea blended with the aromas of spices, laundered clothing, and freshly baked bread. Peter was staying in the seaside home of a tanner named Simon, a simple place, just enough for him to rest from his mission and to pray. There, far from the crowds and religious pressures of Jerusalem, Peter found a peace he had not known for a long time. It was around midday when he went up to the rooftop to pray. The heat was intense, the silence welcome. Waves broke softly on the rocks, and Peter, on his knees, sought the Lord with an open heart. There were still unanswered questions. There were still memories that pursued him. But there, under the blue sky, everything felt lighter. Suddenly, something changed. His eyes grew heavy. His spirit was seized. He entered a state of profound rapture, and he saw heaven open. Descending from above was something like a large sheet held by the corners, containing every kind of animal. Four-footed beasts, reptiles, birds, animals considered unclean according to Jewish law. A voice clear and firm resounded, "Rise, Peter." "Kill and eat," Peter recoiled. His heart pounded faster. This was against everything he had learned since childhood. "Certainly not, Lord. I have never eaten anything common or unclean." But the voice came again with even more authority. "Do not call unclean what God has cleansed." 3 times it was repeated. Then the sheet was taken back into heaven. Peter opened his eyes, sweating, breathless, without understanding. While he was still pondering the meaning of the vision, loud knocks sounded. At the gate, 3 men sent by Cornelius, a Roman centurion, a just man who feared God, known for his generosity and prayers. And he too had had a vision. An angel had instructed him to send for Peter because there was something he needed to hear. Peter went down still perplexed. The men told him everything, and then inside him, the vision began to make sense. The Spirit prompted him, "Go with them without hesitation, for I have sent them." The next day they set out for Caesarea. The road was long, but the time was necessary. Peter watched the landscape pass by, but his mind was fixed on what lay ahead. A Gentile, a Roman centurion, a man outside the people of Israel. And God was moving to reach him. Upon arriving at Cornelius' house, Peter was welcomed with honor. The man fell at his feet, but Peter quickly raised him up. "Stand, I too am a man." He went in. The house was full. Family, servants, friends, all anxious, all attentive. Peter took a deep breath. He had never preached to Gentiles before. He had never crossed that cultural barrier. But something in him said it was time. You know that it is forbidden for a Jew to associate with or enter the house of foreigners. But God has shown me that I must not call anyone common or unclean. That is why I came without hesitation. Cornelius explained his vision. Peter listened, and then he spoke. He preached about Jesus, his life, his death and resurrection. He spoke of forgiveness, of the cross, of hope. And in the midst of his preaching, something extraordinary happened. The Holy Spirit fell just as at Pentecost, just as upon the Jews, now upon the Gentiles. They began speaking in other tongues, praising God, weeping, taken by the same presence Peter knew so well. With eyes brimming, Peter turned to those with him and said, "Can anyone withhold water for baptizing these people who have received the Holy Spirit just as we have?" And he baptized them one by one. That day heaven broke down another wall, and Peter understood God's love went beyond religious boundaries, beyond customs, beyond origins. It was a love that reached the forgotten, the unlikely, even the Gentiles. But when he returned to Jerusalem, he was confronted. "You went into the house of uncircumcised men and ate with them." Peter recounted everything, the vision, the angel, the presence, the baptism. Then he concluded, "If God gave them the same gift he gave us who believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, who was I to stand in God's way?" There was silence and then praise. So God has granted even the Gentiles repentance unto life. Later that night, Peter withdrew. Alone, he gazed at the sky, the same sky that had opened the sheet. "Lord, why me?" He had already preached. He had already healed. Now he had baptized Gentiles. Yet something inside him still stirred. There was a moment he never spoke of, a conversation, a look, words Jesus had spoken to him, which still remained hidden. Not for others, not yet. Something between him and the Master. Something from the night when everything broke. There was still an unrevealed secret. Something between him and Jesus kept since that night. Time had passed since that unforgettable morning on the seashore. Since Pentecost, since Cornelius, the church grew like a river breaching its banks. Men and women were converted. Communities sprang up, and the apostles spread across the earth to proclaim that Jesus had risen and was alive. Peter, now respected and heeded, was one of the pillars of the faith. His words carried weight, his presence encouraged. Wherever he went, he was received with honor. The man who once denied now was seen as a father by many in the faith. But his heart was still of flesh, and his steps, however firm, could still stumble. It was in Antioch that something happened, a distant, diverse place. There, Jews and Gentiles lived together like brothers. The message of the cross had torn down walls. Men of different languages and cultures shared the same bread. Peter felt welcomed. He ate with everyone. He laughed with the Gentiles. He treated them as brothers. But then some men came from Jerusalem, sent by James, strict Jews, zealous for the law. Peter changed. Slowly he withdrew from the Gentiles, avoided eating with them, spent more time with the Jews, and without realizing it or saying a word, he was rebuilding a wall Jesus had torn down with his own blood. The Gentiles noticed. The Jews took heart. Even Barnabas, the kind one, began to pull away. And Paul saw it all. He was new in the faith, but solid as a rock. He knew the heart of the Pharisees because he had been one of them. And when he saw Peter retreat out of fear of men, his zeal for the gospel burned within him. He did not wait. He did not speak behind anyone's back. He stood up in front of everyone and confronted Peter publicly. "If you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, why are you compelling the Gentiles to live like Jews?" Silence fell on all. The Gentiles stopped chewing. The Jews looked at the ground, and Peter listened. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He listened. Paul's words were harsh but true. They were like a mirror. Peter saw himself. The fear, the insecurity, the old habit of backing down when pressure rose. But now he was no longer the same. No longer the impulsive fisherman, nor the denier in the courtyard, nor the man who fled. Now he was Peter, and Peter stayed silent. He accepted the rebuke, not out of cowardice, but out of humility, because he knew the truth of the gospel was higher than his reputation. Paul would later write about that moment in his letter to the Galatians, not with hatred, but with zeal, with love for truth. And Peter bore no grudge. He understood. He was grateful. That night, back in his lodging, Peter sat with downcast eyes. He knew he had erred, and even though forgiven, strengthened, filled with the Spirit, he still stumbled. He was still human. The disciples respected him even more, because acknowledging a mistake before everyone is not weakness, it is strength. But something moved in Peter's heart. After they all slept, he withdrew. He walked alone through the dark streets of Antioch. The city was quiet, but his soul was not. He sat on a stone and lifted his eyes to the starry sky. Paul's voice still echoed, but louder than Paul's. There was another voice, older, sweeter, more penetrating. "Peter, do you love me?" That question still followed him. Even after the fire, even after the Spirit, even after thousands were saved, he closed his eyes. He did not weep, but he felt, because despite the restoration, despite the new beginning, there was a subtle weight, a memory that neither time, nor miracles, nor healings had erased. Something between him and the Master. Something from that night by the fire still not fully revealed. He was no longer the same, but why was there still a weight on his heart? Age arrived like the chill breeze of morning, slowly yet surely. Peter's hair bore strands of silver, and his steps were slower than in the days of long journeys. He was no longer the fisherman who had abandoned his nets on the shores of Galilee, nor the impetuous man who drew his sword in Gethsemane. Time had taught him a different kind of strength, the strength of faith that endures life's pains. Now in his maturity, Peter no longer ran through Jerusalem's streets. He no longer climbed improvised pulpits or saw throngs gathering to hear him with shining eyes. The setting had changed. Persecution had intensified. The Roman Empire tightened its grip. Christians were accused of rebellion, atheism, treason. The cross that once was a symbol of shame now marked them with honor and with blood. Churches were scattered throughout Asia Minor, Cappadocia, Bithynia, Galatia, Pontus. Men and women hiding in caves, in simple homes, in distant forests. They met at night in silence, sharing bread and whispered psalms. They were persecuted, scourged, imprisoned, killed. Yet they did not give up because the flame kindled at Pentecost still burned. And Peter knew he needed to speak to them. It was time to write. He sat before the scroll. The ink was dark. The quill trembled a bit in his aging fingers, but his heart beat with the same fire as before. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the elect exiles scattered throughout the world. The words flowed not as an authoritative speech, but as the confession of a brother, a father who now wanted to embrace with letters those he would never see face to face. He wrote of suffering, not as a theorist, but as someone who had wept alone in the midnight of betrayal. He wrote of hope, not as utopia, but as the certainty of one who had seen the empty tomb. He wrote of future glory, not as poetry, but as promise. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Peter knew what fire was. He had been too close to a fire on a cold night in front of servant girls and soldiers when his own voice shook. Now, as he wrote, he did not hide suffering. He did not sugarcoat reality, but he pointed beyond it. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. He remembered the Master's words, those mornings on the lake's shore, the hand that reached out when he was sinking in the water, the voice that called him rock even when he felt like sand. While writing the second letter, the certainty of his nearing death was ever present. He himself said so. I know that the putting off of my body will be soon as our Lord Jesus Christ has shown me. 2 Peter 1:14, but there was no fear in his words. There was peace, like someone who had already made peace with his own story, like someone who knew eternity was not a concept. It was an appointment. He spoke firmly against false teachers. He warned about mockery. He encouraged holy living and reaffirmed resolutely the certainty of Christ's return. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. He knew many were weary. Some had been imprisoned. Others had been put to death before their families. Many felt fear, as he once had. Therefore, every word was written as seed, every sentence a balm, every chapter a letter of hope addressed to suffering. But there was something he did not write. Something he kept to himself, something he still did not dare share. Because despite everything, there was an unspoken secret, something he had experienced, but whose time was not yet. Each time his quill touched the parchment, he remembered that night on the shore, the fire, the fish roasting, and the thrice-repeated question, Peter, do you love me? And the answer, "You know that I love you." And the final words, "Feed my sheep." Peter now understood the weight of those words. He was living it. Each letter, each teaching, each pain, each act of care was the obedience to that command. But to what came afterward? What else was said there in that moment when only he and Jesus shared the breeze, the coals, and forgiveness? There was something Peter heard and never told anyone. But in every line, an echo of what he heard that night by the sea. A secret he still did not dare reveal. The end had come. Peter knew it, not because of new pains in his weary body, nor because of the cold shackles on his wrists. He knew because the Spirit that once descended like fire still dwelt within him, and now whispered softly as if saying, "It's time to go home." Rome, the capital of the world, pulsed beyond the prison walls. Carriages rattled by, soldiers marched, citizens argued. But within that damp, cold stone cell, time was different, slower, more sacred. Peter sat against the wall, his face marked by time, his hair white with age. His hands no longer had the strength they once did when he was a fisherman. But his heart beat clearly. There was no more room for hurry. Each breath was a prayer, each memory a seed, each silence an invitation to eternity. He looked at the sky through a small gap in the stones. At night, he saw the stars, and whenever he looked at them, he went back in time. He returned to Galilee. He returned to the sand under his feet. He returned to the roar of the waves. He returned to the glowing fire, the smell of fish roasting, and the serene face of the Master before him. It was there in that silent, intimate encounter that everything changed. After the resurrection, Jesus did not seek Peter to accuse him. He did not charge him. He did not point a finger. He simply prepared some fish and asked, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter answered with what remained in him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus carried on a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter felt the pain those words bore, but he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Then a third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" There Peter broke, his heart shattered like clay in a potter's hands. 3 questions, 3 answers, 3 wounds being tended, 3 denials redeemed by love. But it was what happened afterward that became the secret, what no one else heard, what he guarded all his life, what he never told the other apostles or put in the letters he wrote to the persecuted churches. Jesus drew closer. He bent down, bringing his face near. Peter felt the heat of the coals, but it was the warmth of Jesus' gaze that melted him inside, and the Master whispered, "Peter, I see your heart." That short phrase struck his spirit like a ray of light. Peter had not been chosen for his wisdom, nor for his strength, nor for his steadfastness. He had been chosen because he loved, because he was genuine, because even when he erred trying to do right. Jesus continued, "People look at the outward appearance, but I see what's inside. As my father said to Samuel, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. Peter remembered that he wept not out of shame, but out of relief. He who had felt so unworthy now knew Jesus knew him, not by his words, but by his essence. "You are a rock, Peter," Jesus said, smiling, "but not because you are strong, rather because you are sincere." From that day on, Peter lived under a new weight, not one of condemnation, but of responsibility. He knew his mission was not to prove anything to the world. It was to be faithful to the one who looked at him and saw truth. For years, he kept that moment as a treasure. It was a secret between him and the Savior, a secret that sustained him at Pentecost, that gave him the voice to heal at the temple gate, that kept him standing when Paul corrected him, that gave him peace when he wrote to the persecuted churches. Now in a Roman cell, Peter felt it was time to tell. And there, among cold stones and heavy silence, he murmured toward the sky, "I was fully loved. The Lord saw my heart. The guards would soon come." The cross awaited him, and Peter had decided it would not be like his masters. He asked to be crucified upside down, for he did not feel worthy to die in the same manner as the one who loved him despite it all. He closed his eyes. The wind passed through the cell's gap. It was like the Spirit's breath, the same that had touched him so many years before. And there, in his final moments, Peter no longer thought of his failures or his falls or his speeches. He thought only of the voice, that gentle, firm, grace-filled voice. "Peter, I see your heart." And then he understood. He had not been chosen for his strength, nor for his skill, nor for his courage. And at that moment, Peter knew he had not been chosen for being strong, but for being sincere. Rome's sky that morning was overcast. Dense clouds heralded a rain that never came, as though even the weather hesitated to weep. But in the hearts of Jesus' followers, there was no hesitation. Tears flowed freely. Peter was gone. Word spread through alleyways and hidden homes like a sorrowful whisper. Brothers in the faith, many still persecuted, others in flight, heard the account of his death with heavy hearts. He the rock, he the shepherd, he the one who had denied, but also the one who had raised his voice and set the world ablaze. He was crucified upside down by his own choice. "I am not worthy to die as my Lord," he is said to have told the soldiers. A final gesture of humility, a final act of surrender. But death for him was no longer defeat. It was encounter, a promise fulfilled, a well-deserved rest. In the usual house where Christians met in secret, no one quite knew how to respond. Some prayed, others sang psalms through tears. Many simply sat in silence, remembering the man so many had known, who had taught them so much. Peter had not been perfect, and perhaps that was why he was so loved. He was flawed. He was intense. He was human. But he was whole. Young believers in the church, many recently converted, read his letters aloud, and each word seemed more alive than ever. "But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you." 1 Peter 3:15. Others recalled the second letter. "Since I know that the putting off of my body will be soon, I will make every effort so that after my departure you may be able at any time to recall these things." 2 Peter 1:14-15. And they remembered because Peter did not just preach. He lived, he did not just teach. He fell, got up, loved, and followed to the end. In Galilee, families who had never seen him in person were already baptizing their sons with the name Peter. In Judea, elders told stories of when they heard him preach with fiery eyes. And in Rome, even where he was killed, his voice still echoed in every catacomb, in every whispered prayer in the dark. Yet there was more, something the brothers now understood clearly. Peter had carried a secret to the end, something he finally disclosed in his final days. It was not a doctrine. It was not some mysterious revelation. It was a truth, simple and profound. On that morning by the sea, after denying Jesus 3 times and being restored, Peter had heard a phrase that would shape the rest of his life. "Peter, I see your heart." Those words which he guarded like a jewel now passed from mouth to mouth, like a live coal igniting other hearts. Because the world has always prized the strong, the wise, the eloquent. But Jesus looked beyond that. He saw the heart. And there, in that point invisible to man, he built his church. The persecuted Christians finally grasped it. It was not temples that sustained their faith, nor strategies, nor speeches, but sincere hearts, hearts that fall and rise again, that err and yet love, that deny but repent. And in that small group, huddled in grief and hope, someone said, "He was the rock." Another replied, "Yes, but not because he was unyielding, but because he was genuine." And they all wept, not in despair, but in gratitude. The rock was gone, but the promise remained. Peter lived and died with visible and invisible scars, each telling a story which together formed the foundation upon which Jesus built something eternal. The church would go on, faith would spread, the winds would blow, but the house built on the rock would not fall. And Peter was now with the one who had called him by the sea, who had lifted him from the water, who had forgiven him by the coals, who had entrusted him with the flock, and who in the end welcomed him with open arms. On earth, his name would be remembered not as a perfect man, but as living proof that God does not use the flawless, but the willing. Because even those who fail can be used to build something everlasting. If you enjoyed this story, 2 more videos featuring exciting biblical narratives will appear on your screen. Click to watch them. Subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and leave your like. May God bless you and strengthen you just as He did with Peter.